All right. So can you just go to that first one? Now, the one with the polling app. Yeah, great. So you would have got this instruction when Heather sent out the reminder. We'll give you a couple of chances to get ready to do some rapid polling. So the format for tonight is going to be some presentation of some material, then we'll do some rapid polling, and then we'll have some discussion, and we'll go through a couple of cycles of that. It's a way to get sort of live input, real-time feedback. It's a lot of fun actually. So if you just download the Poll Everywhere app, you can get it on Google Play or the Apple Store, and then you go into register, click the register, and you can set up an account, and we'll give you the code for this presentation as soon as we get going on that. So next one, John. Okay, housekeeping, yeah. If you are attending by Zoom, could you send Heather, or Heather will send you a chat message? We're just doing a sort of a virtual sign-in. Just we want to know who attends, so we can keep you in the loop in terms of what comes up. Obviously downloading the app we just talked about. And this is obviously virtual and in person. It's great to see a bunch of people in the Performing Arts Centre there. So thank you for joining us in this manner. This will be being recorded. So if you're on Zoom, we're going to ask you to mute your audio until you want to speak. And that way we can avoid the dogs barking in the background and so on. And this will be recorded and posted on the portal, as part of the public engagement of this process. So next one, John. All right, so the steps for tonight. So our focus tonight is business and economic development. This is our first task force sort of meeting on this topic. And really tonight is a journey of exploration. So and we'll walk through some of the work we've been doing, but we really want to test and validate some ideas with you and get your quite specific input into a whole range of topics around what business and economic development going forward might look like in the Smithville comprehensive planning process. So the steps for tonight, we're going to have just a short introduction, recapping on the pillars and the planning implications so far. Then we're going to have a bit of a review of some of the community input, look at the draft character areas, we'll talk about that. And then mostly we're going to deep dive into some of the preliminary research, discussion, rapid polling on key issues, and then we'll have an opportunity for questions and answers. And then finally, it'll be next steps. So we have 2 hours booked for this. It may not take the whole 2 hours, but that is the time frame but we'll certainly be finished by that time. John? Okay, so just to recap, so what is a comprehensive plan? Most of you would be familiar with the concept of it, and most municipalities undertake comprehensive planning every 10 years. But I think in the case of Smithville, given that there was the big visioning project last year, this is really the chance for the community to be part of translating that articulation of the vision into the implementation of the roadmap for the future. So, some communities do visioning, some do planning. It doesn't always happen together. I think it's been really smart the way you as a community put those right behind each other, because it allows that conversation to flow very naturally into the planning and the execution. And quite obviously, it should guide decision-making in the community for the coming 10 years. So it can be a very powerful process of being able to really shape out the physical manifestation of the vision in your community. The process, so, and we had a bit of a change of this because of the pandemic. So we launched in January, and a number of you I know were part of that. Obviously then the pandemic hit, and so we sort of flipped it a bit, and we've been working on some of the technical background work. So there's been a lot of work being done with Jack and others at the city, trying to understand and proof ideas. We had the community survey. I think we had nearly 400 people complete that. Some really good input into a range of topics. So we're now kicking off these task force sessions. That's July and August, and we're going to have a lot of community engagement processes in between the task forces and after that. So we'll have discussion boards and things like that. We'll talk about that later. And we're aiming to be getting to a draft comprehensive plan in September for review and obviously some more input. So tonight's really the start of an opportunity to have an input, right? So we're probably going to introduce a lot of stuff to you tonight, not necessarily expecting you to to have necessarily formed your final opinion on that, but we want to start the process of thinking and discussion around a set of key topics that we need to vet with you. All right, so just a little bit of language. So this is the approach to developing the comprehensive plan in Smithville. So if you think of it as these sort of layers that we're developing, getting more detail as we go down. So we start off with the community vision, that was established last year. That sort of has identified the community aspirations. So the sort of big action areas that the community's been keen on. What we've been working on is trying to then translate those community aspirations into planning implications. So what does that mean if the community wants to see X happen? What does that mean at the level of planning implications? And one of the things that we'll talk a lot about tonight, or John will, is character areas in Smithville. And this was a concept that was in the previous comprehensive plan, but it's a way to think about how things might happen in geographic location in the community. And there's a number of what I think are really exciting character areas that are forming up as part of this. Then there's some overlay topics, there's things like infrastructure, transportation that cover everything. That informs the future land use map, and then obviously that leads to the final comprehensive plan. But the key part of this is there's just a huge amount of community engagement all the way through this process. So this plan's your plan at the end of the day. Some of the things we've been working on to try and make this unique and specific to Smithville. So this is very much not a cookie cutter. Obviously, following the thread of the strategic pillars that came out of the vision, that makes a lot of sense in a continuity sense going through. There's also been a lot of work to engage youth throughout the visioning and the planning process. And obviously, some of those things we'd planned right now with the school are on hold, but the youth had a huge involvement through the visioning process, and actually a lot of them took the community survey. We're also working on a lot of visual communication, and you'll see that in some of our stuff tonight. So we really want to be able to help people get a very sort of tactile sense of what the comprehensive plan means, what Smithville might look like and feel like, and get down to that level of really trying to understand the visual sort of experience that's been defined in the comprehensive plan. And then obviously this community is ambitious enough to be best in class, high performing school district, attractive community. So obviously we're putting the pressure on to leverage best practices in other communities so that you can remain in that high level cohort community. You're also in this, so this is from the visioning, the scenario planning framework. We did all that work to think about these different futures and then think about preferred and expected futures. John, the next one, please. So there was this, if you recall this, the green votes for where do we think Smithville will end up if we don't do anything different to what we're currently doing, the expected future. And then the blue dots were on the right-hand side was where do you want to end up? What would be your preferred future? And obviously, the data points to a need for a pivot, right? So the comprehensive plan is laying down the railway tracks to say, okay, how do we change or pivot our direction a little bit here so that we can get to that preferred future and avoid, what might be our unintended expected future. The vision was built around this framework. So the Smithville Community Oasis designed for 2030, that notion of this sort of respite from the world, an oasis that has a lot of modernized amenities and so on. People just really latched onto that through the visioning. That's really supported, the execution or the implementation of that is supported by these 5 big pillars. So the continued commitment to education, enhanced recreation and connectivity, diverse housing and neighbourhood options. We had that task force last night. The strengthened business and economic development tonight, obviously. Then the retention of small town feel and sense of community, which is Thursday night, and the recreation one's tomorrow night, Wednesday night. And, you can't read that, but just this is part of what we're sort of trying to build here, which is we have these pillars at the top, then we have the community aspirations as the next layer, and then what we're working on this whole bottom section is the planning implications and needs, and that's what we need to dig into you with tonight. And so just to talk a little about the character areas, just to introduce this concept, if you're not familiar with it, it's a sort of notion in comprehensive planning where you define areas that have some unique unifying characteristic or purpose, right? And As I said, Smithville did have character areas, but we've redefined those and expanded them. So there are these 5 big distinct character areas, and what's not in the character areas but is within the city limits, that's really rural and green space. That's the proposing. We don't see development occurring in those areas in the next 10 years. But these big character areas all have unique implications in terms of land use, zoning and planning, but also, you know, what would be there and what could be there, and that's what we want to dig into with tonight. You can see that they're contiguous, so they all come, they basically join together, really built around the spine of Highway 169. Pretty exciting way to think about the future, I think, and I will hope you'll enjoy that. We're doing the strength in business and economic development tonight. Next one, John. So the community aspiration. So we just, you know, we want to now dig into this business and economic development topic. The community aspirations that really came out of the visioning. So these were the high level strategic action areas in this pillar that people identified had the most potential, right? So one, focus on technology and bioscience companies. So as in terms of sort of business attraction and business development, people saw those type of companies having a really good match with the skill set coming out of the high school and the type of industry that people would want to have in the community. Leveraging off the airport redevelopment, no brainer. Obviously a multi-billion-dollar, you know, major transportation hub, and you're within just like that. You know, you can just be there within, you know, literally 5-10 minutes. Pursue tourism-related business potential. You know, obviously Smithville's become a big draw with the lake, and in fact, last night we heard people talking about the attraction of this area, particularly with you know, the COVID restrictions and so on. That, you know, the tourism, because you're right there within that striking distance, may have huge potential. And also out of the visioning, people talked about the need to create dedicated industrial zones. You know, that to get the balance of land available for commercial and industrial activity, there needs to be a focus of that in this comp planning process. So they were the community aspirations. And the planning implications, and this is the start of our deliberations, and we're going to dig in again, as I said, tonight with you. The implications of those aspirations are, one is we need to think about creating an expanded industrial area from the core of the 169 industrial character area, and that's at the bottom end of Smithville, below 92. John will talk more about that. There's also this idea of creating this overlay zone to allow sort of flexible use, industrial flex or office uses with significant employment and tax bases, taking advantage of the location. Through the visioning and some of the early work we've been doing, you know, these sort of professional office parks, those type of things, or technology sort of centres could have a lot of potential, obviously, in a place like Smithville. 3, consider providing incentives to attract key industries that provide strong benefits. John's going to talk about, you know, how do we go about attracting the kind of businesses that might match what you want. 4, adjust the zoning or create an overlay that enables tourism, recreation, hospitality development near the lake. Certainly you're very close to that point where some sort of a hotel complex facility, you're really at that point of it being a viable proposition. And that was well explored, I think, through the visioning process and came out towards the end of the visioning planning process. And the last one there is the focused retail and commercial activity in the downtown and Hospital Bluff area. And obviously the Main Street program, the Main Street redevelopment sort of gives a real kick to the downtown. So then how do you keep that going with expansion, infill and clustering? So they're the planning implications, right? So that's sort of where we've got to with some more research we want to show you. So we want to dig into how do you make this happen? So John, can I pass this back to you?
Sounds good. So as David said, we're going to be talking, really kind of diving into the economic development potential and how do we guide that over the next 10 years, and kind of want to set the stage and define that, as that's kind of often a kind of fungible term that can mean some different things. But in this context, we're really talking, you know, how do we guide and strengthen local business activity, employment, wages, and there's kind of an indirect or kind of secondary implications of that from a planning context, because as we know, you know, if there's employment growth, that's going to impact things such as where people commute to. It may attract new residents. It may impact kind of the relationship of Smithville to Kansas City proper and within the region. And it also has spending impacts in terms of the employees coming to town and where they frequent in terms of businesses and how they kind of flow throughout the town. And then there's another type of implication that is going to kind of be a topic throughout this conversation, which is commercial tax revenue. And when you think about, this is a pretty key aspect of city management and city planning, typically in most towns, and I don't know the specifics of Smithville, but in most towns, residential land uses are a net loss from a strictly kind of fiscal perspective. They pay a lot of tax revenues for different sources. They also take a lot in terms of services. And so in terms of really kind of having a sustainable, hardy tax base, in many jurisdictions, commercial is kind of the best aspect to have kind of a positive revenue stream that can be used for a variety of different things to kind of to serve local residents. When we talk about who is this plan geared towards, as David said, there's kind of two main constituents. There's the current residents of Smithville, and then there's the future residents of Smithville. And speaking of future residents, we know that Smithville is a growing city. And Leslie talked about last night during the housing discussion, of which I see a couple of faces on Zoom who are part of that conversation, some new faces as well, that our projections are, if considering a number of different factors, you would expect to bring in approximately 3,500 to 4,500 new residents into the city of Smithville over the next 10 years. And as we learned from yesterday, folks were surprised that that number wasn't even higher. And as we'll talk about a little bit later today, there's some implications and some drivers that may help expedite that considerably. And on the flip side, in terms of what are the employment projections, those are pretty in line with the residential growth estimates. So based on how commercial and employment has grown to date so far, based on what is projected regionally and what Smithville's kind of capture of that growth would be, and based on development activity and permitting, we expect that the growth in kind of commercial land uses to bring in approximately somewhere between, say, 400 and 900 new employees to Smithville over the next 10 years. And so we have about 2,300 employees currently. So now we're looking at between 2,700 and 3,200 jobs located in Smithville by 2030. And kind of building off of the vision and the goals from the visioning process, and kind of from all the feedback that we've heard through this comprehensive planning process to date, there's kind of a few main kind of key concepts that have really been enlightened and that really have helped inform and direct the planning and analysis that have happened to date. A couple of those key concepts are that we've heard from the community is help the city control its own destiny with strategic economic growth. Kind of don't let the region dictate what Smithville is. Smithville itself should kind of help guide and dictate what Smithville is moving forward. Another kind of big concept related to economic development within the next 10 years is that the character of Smithville should remain the character of Smithville. But it can be guided and enhanced. And so the downtown character should continue to be what the downtown is, maybe with some infill, maybe with a little more density, maybe with some more vibrancy and mixed use. But keep the downtown. And then similarly along Route 169, that it is what it is, but has the opportunity for more guidance, both visually, both in terms of directing what type of land use, both in terms of increasing more connectivity. Then we have a few other kind of key takeaways as the city population grows. We know that we want to focus on kind of certain priority industry types that are really relevant to the region and that we think could be really ideal for Smithville, both in terms of its proximity to downtown, its land values, its proximity to the airport and highway system. And these may include technology, bioscience, and other kind of growing regional industries. As David said, we know we want to kind of make full leverage of the airport redevelopment. And if you think about the jurisdictions that are really going to be primed to take advantage of that, Smithville is at the top of that list. We know there's a big opportunity to pursue tourism as an economic driver. We know that there may be an opportunity to identify specific areas that are most suitable for different industrial uses. And we'll talk about this a little more in some of the preceding task forces later this week, but about potential annexation and growth and the implications of that, particularly if there's an opportunity to annex closer to Smithville Lake to target recreation and tourism uses closer to the lake. And then I also do want to kind of call attention to the fact that economic development, though that's the conversation here, it really is an overlapped concept with aspects such as the other pillars in the task forces relating to housing, small town feel, sense of community, education, connectivity. These aren't separate, kind of completely separate dialogues or categories, even though we're breaking them into separate task forces. And I also wanted to frame some of the discussion that we're going to be having over the course of the next hour and a half. I see kind of three outputs that we're hoping to get from you all. The one is to catch you all up to speed as what we've learned and preliminary findings and recommendations that are informing the strategic plan. The second is to make sure that we're not getting anything wrong, kind of looking backwards at kind of what we're presenting to you. Is this aligned with the community's vision? Is this raising any red flags? Is there anything that we need to revisit? And then the third item is we're going to be asking some very specific questions and kind of prying into certain key areas that is missing information that we don't think we know the answer to yet, and that's going to be pretty vital in helping to inform planning recommendations as part of the strategic plan. And so we're going to try to pack in quite a bit into this discussion. I think we'll be able to do it, but depending on how discussion goes, I reserve the right to maybe redirect or shift things around or kind of instill time limits for folks. But I think that that won't be necessary. So in terms of the regional context, there's a concept. It's funny. There's a concept in terms of commercial growth that always sticks with me because it just seems to be true everywhere, and it's not necessarily intuitive. And this is quarter. I don't know if I've ever mentioned this actually, even to Leslie or David or Heather. The concept called the favored quarter of growth, and that is where, kind of radiating out from a downtown. Where does office growth tend to happen? Where is kind of the hot spot for growth? And for whatever reason, if you kind of think of a clock, that often takes up, like if you think of a pie, a quarter of kind of a radial trajectory. And that is true in recent years in Kansas City, and it's not happening in the direction of Smithville. And so when the kind of larger map on the slide is larger kind of major office developments that have occurred over the last 10 years, and might be actually a little more recent than that. A lot of them are in Kansas City proper or down to the south, Overland Park, kind of that direction. And the same can be said with some of the kind of key sectors that you see in the Kansas City metropolitan area, from bioscience companies, animal health companies, and we'll be getting a little more into those sectors shortly. Those two you see predominantly a little closer to Kansas City proper and kind of to the south and west. However, what we do know is a couple things that, for a couple reasons, that may be poised to change. But we also know that there's a couple interventions that we may be able to concentrate on as a city to kind of change that a little bit. So we know that there's a new giant data center. I think it's proposed over 7 million square feet, just south of Smithville, right by I-435. And then, what we want to talk about in particular, and that we've identified through engagement and through our research so far, are kind of 5 core opportunities that we call demand drivers, something that we think could kind of rejigger an increase in desire for certain types of commercial activity. And some of these have an implication not only on economic development and creating jobs and economic activity in Smithville, but also will have a pretty direct impact potentially on driving residential activity one way or another. So the first of these demand drivers is enhancing tourism. And we know that that's likely related, in particular, not exclusively, but in large part to Smithville Lake. And so that may be whether it's a hotel or convention center or water sports or some kind of activity that really kind of highlights and brings people to the lake, but also to the trail network and also to the rest of the region. Another potential demand driver that may kind of increase the rate of demand in the upcoming 10 years is for the city to really fully leverage the airport redevelopment. And that may be, I don't know if it's from shuttles and connectivity to really kind of highlighting and marketing regionally Smithville's access and proximity to the airport. A third demand driver is targeting and attracting key industries. So putting resources, whether it's tax abatements, whether it's grants, whether it's allocating city staff to be a conduit to reach out to potential target industries, but putting resources into or incentives into particular industries that may serve Smithville well to choose to locate in the city of Smithville. The fourth demand driver is enhancing education and workforce preparedness. So whether it's developing a new educational institution, whether it's different types of programs kind of aimed at key industry sectors, can Smithville kind of help enable the type of workforce that particular industry sectors really want to see to kind of sweeten the deal to locate in town. And then the fifth is prioritizing a downtown Main Street. And again, none of these are particularly exclusive of each other, but with limited resources, it does come down to priorities too, in terms of how and where does the city of Smithville want to prioritize. Main Street is something that we, it's a particular soft spot in our hearts. We do a lot of work with Main Street communities. And so we're really excited to see that Smithville has gained accreditation as a Main Street community, has received funding in full for the next 2 years. Particularly necessary in times of COVID. So that's really exciting and could really help in terms of having an advocate and a partner to oversee commercial activity to make downtown an even more thriving and sustainable place. And so with that, we wanted to kind of drill on that a little bit. And we're going to have our first rapid polling of the evening.
Right. Okay. So we're going to have a little bit of rapid polling, right? So we wanted to give, and we've got a good, looks like we've got about, say, 25 or 30 people who are either there in person or online. So we're going to get a nice sample here. How we do this, right, is you should have all hopefully downloaded the app. And if you haven't, I'm going to give you a minute to do it, right? So you can just download that on your smartphone. You can see here, if you can see my cursor at the bottom, it says registration. You can go in there, sign up. If you sign up, it means that you don't have to, it will register your name, right? And you can, participate in polls through the rest of this sort of week and comprehensive planning process. Then once you go in, you can hit the home button and you'll see it says pollev.com username. And this is to join the presentation. And so that's FIQ up here at the top, FIQ 124. So, and there is a text option. You can text FIQ 124 to 22333. And then once you join it, it'll prompt you as I go through. So I'm just going to give everyone a minute to load that, make sure. Is anybody having any troubles getting into the app, or are most people in? Okay, so I'm going to assume that means most people are in, right? All right, so let's, sorry, wrong section, right? All right, here we go. So test question really, right? So this is just a chance for you to get used with the technology. You select their AOB. All right, looks like it's getting stable. So most people are, give you a chance to finish. You can also go and change your answers if you decide you didn't want to live in Smithville anymore. All right, so let's go, right? So it's going to be a series of questions here, right? And you'll have some choices. So over the next 10 years, to what extent should the City of Smithville prioritise resources and attention to enhance tourism as an economic driver? And we're going to give you a number of different strategies here to choose from, right? So it's very low, low, moderate, high, very high. Okay, so seeing fair bit of support on the idea of prioritising to enhance tourism as an economic driver. Okay, that looks like it's pretty stable now. Most responses are in. And by the way, we'll also be posting these responses in summary version on the portal tomorrow, right? So this will be all part of the public data gathering. So it looks like tourism, you know, it's you know, around the high, right? You know, some people 25, 23% very high, moderate, but a good support for tourism as an economic driver. Let's try this one. Let's talk about leveraging the airport redevelopment. So over the next 10 years, to what extent should the city prioritise resources and attention to leverage the airport redevelopment as an economic driver? Okay. Hold on the high there. And what we're really validating with you here is these strategies or these sort of drivers that John talked about. You know, which ones of these are the, you know, relatively the most important? Okay, so this looks pretty stable. Okay, so you can see the results, very, very high level support there on the high. Let's talk about target and attract key industries. So over the next 10 years, to what extent should the city prioritise resources and attention to target and attract key industries as an economic driver? So what are we going to get the mayor and the alderman and the planning commission and all those people to put their, and the staff to put their attention on? Targeting and attracting key industries. Okay. Similar kind of result. Okay. It looks like everybody's got theirs in. Next one is focusing on enhancing educational workforce preparedness as an economic driver. To what extent should the focus be on that? It was something that was talked a lot about in the visioning and about the high performing school district and the expertise in robotics and some of those programs. That's the sort of topic that I think this is pointing towards. Okay, interesting. A little more on the moderate side here. Okay, that looks stable. Prioritising a vibrant downtown Main Street. So over the next 10 years, to what extent should the city prioritise resources and attention on that, on the downtown as an economic driver? Okay, seems to have the strongest support there. And that's not really super surprising because you're often running with that, right? And that's, you know, and it does address a really important kind of heart and soul component of the community, as well as providing a lot of amenities. So John, that's the last one, isn't it?
I believe so.
Okay, good. So I'll just finish that. I'll hand that back to you, John, to the screen back to you, okay? All right. Good job, everybody. Thanks. That's the first round. We've got more to come.
All right. So very interesting. And I think that largely aligns with what we expected, and that's helpful. And I want to, we're on track time-wise, so I want to open it up for 5 or 10 minutes and just hearing your reactions And I'm going to give a shout out to Sean, who also was had some really great comments uh, yesterday. And he, for those who were able to access the chat feature, it's worth seeing his comments. But I'm going to frame a couple of questions, but I would also encourage you, Sean, to share maybe with the group if you're willing, kind of what you just chatted. But I would love to hear some broader feedback from folks for the next 5 or 10 minutes or so on what's your either kind of pitch or thinking behind priorities in terms of and I'm thinking to city attention and city resources and financially, knowing that it's in an ideal world, we kind of are able to focus on so many different types of things. But if really, what is do you think should be a main emphasis for the city? And it would also say it can be related to that or an entirely separate question. Are there any solutions or creative ideas that any of you have related to these aspects? Are there any opportunities or assets or things that we should be aware of or ideas for the city to help kind of leverage any of these aspects? And so with that, I'd love to open it up to whoever's, if anybody has any thoughts or comments.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and share the insight, I guess, on like some of the ideas inside the Kansas City North area and its connection with Smithville or potential connection with Smithville. We already know about the redevelopment of the airport. That's pretty out in the open. The data center, like that's not, the thing to remember about the data center is it's vast. It has the potential to be the largest data center in the world, but also it's hosting servers, which means there's not going to be a lot of people there. It's just a vast, large, high-tech industry area. The other piece that is interesting to look at that was noted in the chat section is the Twin Creek Village area, and that sits approximately at 169 and 152. And MD Management has that. They've been working on it for several years of laying the infrastructure down with the streets, pipes, and things on those lines. The potential build out allegedly is 75,000 additional people living there. I mean, that would shift everything within the Northland anyways. But like part of my question or the curiosity is, how can we, through a competitive lens of business, how can we poach those residents? I'm not saying they need to move to Smithville. I mean, if they do that, cool. But at least how can we take their need of work and contribute it closer to them through Smithville, instead of them having to traverse to Johnson County, to Liberty, to even downtown Kansas City. I mean, inside the development world of societies, the reality is this: we have to be competitive to grow, and we can do that without losing tact at the same time. The other piece is looking at downtown in Smithville. We've done the infrastructure, we've done the piping, the plumbing, the streets, the sidewalks, the 6-inch curbs to step and fall off of. That's like a half joke. We've done all that, and it looks great and it looks nice. My concern is we still lose businesses, and I'm trying to figure out why. And one of those areas that I think Smithville hurts every so often is, believe it or not, the food industry. We've had some really unique, amazing restaurants develop in Smithville over the years. And we've lost them. And that's not to say the community didn't support them, because they did. But like, what can we do to retain that authenticity of something that's creative and unique to Smithville that does create that lure for people inside the metro area to want to travel to us to see what we have to offer, plus the lake and more?
Those are really great points. Does anybody want to respond to anything that Sean said, or again, address kind of what you think should be key priorities, or any kind of ideas or solutions that you have that may be insightful? All right, you guys are an easy crew. Then I'll respond to you, Sean, and then we'll move on to the next category. I don't mind talking. So yeah, and kind of what you know, as you know, as an economist, when your kind of question of, you know, how do we support these different business types? How do we get customers to these restaurants downtown so that they can thrive and stay in town? You know, I really think of it as market areas, as what is your customer base, and kind of those different cuts. And so there's local residents, where as you have more residents, you're able to serve more shops and more you know, restaurants and other types of businesses. And then there's employees, the more daytime traffic they have, and often residents are what you'd call kind of nighttime traffic or customers, because they're frequenting businesses in the evenings and weekends. The flip side of that, in terms of providing revenue to businesses during the daytime, is often employees, where a certain percentage of workforce is going to frequent restaurants during the day for lunch, and or bring up and pick up some food on the way home. And then there's the kind of a non-local market area, kind of destination visitors. And that's something where either through marketing, or really having a restaurant or business with a reputation that can draw people from outside of town, or by having the type of climate where there's enough visitors coming into town that frequent the restaurant as well. So there's many different possible options of what can lead to that, and oftentimes it's kind of a mix of all of the above. But really good points, and frankly, a lot of good information for us to consider and integrate as well. So I'm going to move on to, as David talked about, and as many of you have heard, are well aware of, you know, we're using this concept of character areas to kind of break down. So we're speaking about a lot of topics broadly, but a lot of these topics really speak to not only particular areas of the city, some of them speak to almost parcel by parcel specific elements in terms of key opportunities to direct certain types of growth. And so, you know, again, we're talking specifically about business type of growth. And what we've done, and where we're at in the planning process, is we've created a number of different kind of conceptual maps, which we'll get into and go through in these different character areas. And the purpose of those elements is to start to define specifically, and kind of on paper or on digital, you know, where should these types of uses locate, and what needs to go where, and where, and what this all kind of culminates into is a really big output, a really big element with any comprehensive plan, is what's called a future land use map. And what that is it's the vision of the community saying, in 10 years from now, in this case, this is where we think different types of uses will be and should be in the city. And that is a planning tool that has some real teeth. And so that helps to inform, it's not the only aspect, but that helps to guide future zoning changes, that helps to guide development approvals, that helps to guide decisions made by city leadership and city council. So that's an important thing. And so what we're doing as part of this discussion, when we're drilling down on some of these concepts, is we're helping to inform these conceptual maps that we're making, which, by the way, are all available currently online. If you go to the planning website, and we'll have the link at the end of the conversation, you can follow and look at these initial maps of the character areas. And again, this is what our initial thinking is based on our analysis and feedback to date as to what the recommendations will be for the future land use map. And this is a living, breathing document. It's online, and you can, frankly, I don't recommend it, but you're welcome to check it regularly and see if it, you know, changes, and it has so far. But that'll continue to adjust based on the information that we receive, and then that will end up turning into the collective kind of future land use map that will be part of this comprehensive plan. And so, when we're talking about business growth, we're going to really drill into two particular character areas where we want to have a nuanced conversation, where we kind of we are pretty sure that we don't know the will of the community and the answers yet. And there's three kind of areas that, from at least an economic development perspective, we think that we have pretty good ideas as to the pulse of and the will of the community. So we're going to kind of blow through those areas pretty briefly, And then we're really going to kind of drill into two of the areas in particular. So we're going to start on, or did somebody say something? We're going to start with the north residential character area. And as kind of the images show, and as you may see in this map, right now there is just about no commercial uses in this area. It's really kind of that suburban type of residential land formation and a bunch of green space and agricultural space. And we really kind of expect that to stay. And so we've talked about this area in the housing discussion, but we really don't see much or any commercial growth in this portion of the city within the next 10 years. The downtown Oasis character area. We know this will be a really kind of fundamentally important location for growth. And we're actually going to really get into some of those elements on Thursday when we talk about the character of the downtown. So on Thursday's task force discussion, we're going to talk about density, we're going to talk about design, we're going to talk about mix of uses, kind of how do we create that right character for downtown. From an economic development perspective, we know that this is a great location for continued moderate increase in density, especially through infill development. So making sure that this is a great, vibrant place where there's shops that are located, and there's still retail, where folks can work, where folks can live, and where it kind of has that bustling nature, and it kind of continues to fill in kind of underutilized parcels, but really to retain that character. This isn't like a giant shake-up or some kind of massive conceptual change. And we also know kind of within the broader downtown area, and again, these are elements that are going to be discussed later this week, we know that there's an opportunity both through business locations and through design elements to kind of connect the downtown a little better to 169 and kind of a gateway. We know that there may be an opportunity to kind of direct certain recreational or tourism related uses closer to Smithville Lake. So those are elements we're going to test out a little further. But kind of here's our future land use map, kind of preliminary concept map. And really what that shows is that most of the uses in terms of what you see as an overhead are about to stay the same. And kind of, maybe there's some more infill development and moderate densification in the kind of historic downtown kind of historic overlay, area right in the center of downtown. The third area that there's going to be some continued growth is the hospital, what we're calling the Hospital Bluffs character area. And this is the area, the neck of the woods where the hospital is located, where the schools are located, where the post office is located. So it's really kind of marked by a lot of really important institutions for the city. It has still pretty low density and a lot of kind of strip commercial activity, auto-oriented commercial uses. And we think from what we've heard, in terms of the future land use map and in terms of the recommendations of the comprehensive plan, that this will still kind of retain its concentration of civic uses. It will retain its kind of location as kind of lower density commercial activity. There will likely be, and we've seen from existing development proposals, there will likely be some continued infill. It may kind of infill and densify a little bit, but it's unlikely to change in a really considerable way, at least over the next 10 years. And here's kind of our kind of concept map showing certain areas that there's existing vegetation and green spaces that are retained. There's potential growth areas that are likely to not be developed within the next 10 years east of the schools. And then the areas in red are potential infill opportunities where it's likely and it's likely that the city should allow new commercial development that's kind of in keeping to locate in this area. So there's a couple areas that we really want to drive into in more specificity. And I will say, once we kind of pause and have a discussion on a couple of these areas, still feel free to respond or make a comment on the other areas as well. Though I want to focus most of the conversation on these areas, but we certainly don't want to just assume that any of kind of our working hypotheses are set in stone. So we're still want to vet and test out all of our assumptions. But so the fourth character area that we do want to really kind of dive into is what we're calling the 169 industrial character area. And as the name really kind of insinuates, and as David mentioned kind of in the initial framing, this is where we think is kind of the most sensitive location based on what we've heard to locate industrial type of uses. And the reason being that there's greenfield development that can be protected visually and aesthetically from other uses where it won't be incompatible. It has fantastic connectivity, and there may be an opportunity to, kind of similar to the areas to the north, retain and densify, and kind of with some infill, some of the commercial uses along the road, maybe some opportunities for some additional residential uses or subdivisions with maybe slightly higher density. But we do think that this area more to the west of 169 off of 144th Street is a pretty prime location for industrial type of land uses. And so what we're going to do is have some polling about when we say industrial uses, what are the types of industrial uses that may be appropriate, and kind of start defining that in a little bit more specificity. But then just kind of hear your reaction to the idea of this being kind of the key location, because what we've heard and what's really interesting, and we talked about this last night as well, we work in communities across the country, and most of the time when you say the word growth or you say the word density, a whole lot of people really kind of bristle and get pretty scared pretty fast. And something that's been really interesting in our working with you all is that there seems to be a much more, frankly, nuanced and a more receptive, more receptivity to these concepts, and especially under the lens of kind of controlling your own destiny, so again, from what we've heard, this we think preliminarily is the right place to say, okay, if there's going to be industrial growth that helps inform the tax base, that helps provide jobs, it's not. Many of these types of uses are not appropriate to be located right next to a school or right next to a subdivision, but we think that maybe this kind of purple area is the suitable location for this type of use. And so with that, we're going to kind of jump back to your phones and do some polling and kind of drill down into some of the specific types of uses, type of industrial uses that exist, and just kind of test your receptivity to these types of uses. And again, to kind of frame that, I would think of it from the perspective of if this is a use and a user that would want to come to Smithville and would provide some community benefits, again, whether it's jobs, whether it's diversification of industry, whether it's tax base, to what extent are you receptive to these different types of users? And then maybe, David, as you go through the poll, I might give like a quick descriptor of each of the different types of industrial uses to inform folks.
Sure. Okay, so let's go to the poll now. Your phone, you may need to re-enter the FIQ 124 on the home button there just to reactivate your phone, right? Because if it's been idle for a while, it might have dropped out of the polling, right? But we're going to ask you a series of questions specifically focused on this this character area. And as John was saying, we've tried to work on these conceptual plans to make sure that there's a lot of good buffer, right? So because we know the look and the feel is also really important to people, so we're trying to balance that with land use and where it can go and so on. And roughly speaking, right up and down Smithville to the east of 169 seems to lean better to the kind of residential, because it's tied into the trail system, and that's why some of these sort of splits are designed. So this is what we're gonna drill into this character area and have a couple of questions just to get your collective thoughts on this, right? All right, so let's go here. So the future land use for the Highway 169 industrial character area includes mostly industrial and some commercial residential. Do you think this reflects the community desires? So yes, it should be strongly focused on industrial and commercial. B, maybe we could have some more modest commercial and residential. Or no, we should be much more flexible in typology. Or D, unsure. Yeah, that's pretty strong. Yeah, and the logic, I think, John, if I can just add to this too, the logic in the proposal is that, that sort of intersection of 92 and 169 gives you really good proximity to the airport, and the ability to be able to leverage off the airport and so on, but also creates that distinct separation from some of the residential areas and allows you to buffer that. Did you want to add anything to that? Okay, all right, good. So most people got their votes in? All right, good, that looks stable. All right, thank you very much. We're now going to ask you a series of questions. Okay, so we're going to ask you about a series of different types of possible land use, right? And we're going to get your reaction to these, right? So to make best use of this area, how suitable an industrial land use is warehousing and distribution, right? And I think there's like 7 or 8 of different types of land use that we want to ask you. So your choices are going to be the same, going to be A, not at all appropriate or the best use. B, maybe, but it's not ideal. C, certainly okay, but we could probably find a more optimal land use. And D, absolutely the perfect land use for this area. I'll give you a chance to, and you can, if you change your mind, you can go back and change your response.
So again, this kind of to frame, if in case anybody is a little unclear what this may mean, warehousing and distribution is a low density use, is a little traffic heavy from a trucking vantage point, potentially from loading, as a lot of loading docks and potentially large parking lots to accommodate it, typically needs relatively low land values because it takes up so much space, that has relatively few jobs relative to the amount of space that it takes up, but is the type of thing that really likes to locate, frankly, in terms of the owners of a company that does warehousing, what they're looking for is relatively low land values relative to region, but really good transit access. So Smithville, from that vantage point, is really ideal for a potential investor.
So it was interesting, John, the longer you talked there, the less the response was for D, perfect land use for this area. All right, so it looks like most people got their votes in. Let's go to the next one. So let's talk about this in terms of manufacturing as a land use, and how would you consider that as its appropriateness for this area? And John, did you want to just contextualize manufacturing? Because we have a couple of manufacturing options here. So could you just frame that up a little?
Yeah. So we have manufacturing and we have light manufacturing, and manufacturing could also be considered kind of heavy industrial, and so that's really what you kind of think of in terms of higher capacity, uses a lot of electric power, it has ductwork, and kind of the creation of things, but it's really what you kind of think of in kind of typical industrial.
Okay. All right, so how about it? Let's see what you're saying. Okay, interesting. All right, more appetite for this. Looks like we've got a couple more coming in. All right. Okay, we'll go to the next one. 10 telecom and data hosting centers, very pertinent, right? So how do you view this land use in terms of its suitability for this industrial 169 character area? And this is probably self-explanatory, this one, is it, John? Or?
Yep. Yeah, and again, pretty low density, relatively low employment, requires less expensive land. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay, looks like most people have got their votes in. Okay, thank you. We'll go to the next one. Flex buildings. So do you want to explain flex buildings to us, John?
Yep. Flex, I define as it's kind of a mix of things where you don't know exactly what you classify it as. So it may have some production and kind of typical office, but may have a showroom, may have kind of a commercial element to it, may have some office space component to it. So it often has warehousing and distribution, but it also often has then office spaces as part of that, and sometimes even a commercial space as part of that as well.
All right, great. All right. Okay, so let's have at it. Let's see what you think about flex buildings. Okay, people want to keep the options open, eh? Okay, interesting. All right, good. Okay, so we'll go to the next one. So light manufacturing. So previously we talked manufacturing. So John, do you give us some reference around light manufacturing?
Yeah. So still often about kind of the production of goods, typically at kind of a lower scale, typically, without a noxious element. It doesn't kind of have as extensive a kind of physical plant or space requirements.
Okay, all right. Seems to have a lot of appeal. Okay, we'll go to the next one. Research and development as a land use.
Yep. So this is a little more high tech, a little higher end jobs, often in the fields of computer science, or electronics, or biotechnology. Often relates to flex. This could be kind of a component within a larger flex use. It also could be a component of really any of the other industrial uses as well.
Okay, interesting. And presumably this would come with some higher paying job sort of categories.
Yeah.
High density employment. Yeah.
Might also, if this impacts things, might also have a little more, the kind of flip side of the more employment too is larger kind of surface parking lots potentially, and more kind of folks commuting in and out, which is both a plus and a minus depending on how you look at it.
All right. Okay, but very, very strong support or perspective about that land use. Okay. Showrooms. So I think we know what they are. So what do you think of showrooms as a suitability of land use? Okay. Okay, interesting. All right. Okay. And second last one. So what do you think about controlled environment, agriculture and horticulture? And perhaps, John, I'll just talk to this for a second, that we're seeing a lot more, greenhouses, those type of things going in peripheries to major urban centres, supplying, fresh produce, fast speed and so on. Take up a bit of land, different form of land use. What do you think of this one? Okay, there's much support for that. All right. Still people voting.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Okay, and then the last one is, what do you think of things like animal health or biosciences? And I assume we're talking more about sort of not the farms, well, not the farm side, but the scientific side, like the pharmaceutical side of agriculture and so on, data sciences.
Yeah, so both kind of research and production of therapeutics or diagnostics, kind of biological testing, and definitely sectors that are very big and growing in the Kansas City region.
Yeah, good. Interesting. Yeah, we talked during the visioning too about how Smithville sits between Kansas City and that, you know, massive agricultural region that runs really all the way, you know, right up to the Canadian border and beyond. So, all right, interesting. Okay, so thank you for your responses on that. So, John, I'll hand it back to you, and then we can go. You can have some discussion on this.
Yeah, so there's kind of three types of questions that I'd love to pose to you all as a group. The one is, you know, any responses to, I would say if you don't think that this area is the right location, to kind of give your pitch as to why this industrial uses should not locate in this area. Another question that we'd love to hear any responses to is any kind of pitch or your feelings on why certain, you know, if you feel strongly that there's a certain type of use or multiple certain types of uses that shouldn't come or that should go in this area. And then just any kind of other general thoughts that, you know, kind of that may have come to mind so far during this conversation.
That would fall into some of this industrial type of area that we were talking about, and that's correlated somehow to our economic development, I'm sure.
And Cynthia or Jack or someone kind of in the room, could you, I couldn't hear the question.
The question, if you all want to discuss it, come on up, but this is a mic. But the question was really related, and Jennifer, if I get it wrong, correct me, that where does marijuana manufacturing fit into this discussion, particularly because this is an area where we have one permit issued by the state for 3 different types of manufacturing in this particular area related to medical marijuana and the impact that has on economic development.
Yep. Well, perfect. Jennifer, now that you've broken the ice, where does marijuana fit into this?
Well, my understanding is we're getting it whether we want it or not. So it's here. Yeah. It's here. So it's obviously provide some good tax base for it, but that will probably dictate what goes around it, would be my guess. So like a security company, if we target a security company, they're obviously going to have that.
Is there anybody?
I can move that for you too.
So I would love to hear if there's anyone, so kind of in the same framing as the rest of these elements, is there anyone that really doesn't want any of these uses, or thinks that, or even if it's not personal, thinks that it's just really not right for a city or for this location? And I would like to add medical marijuana to that conversation as well. Is there anybody that feels strongly that that would be either an inappropriate use or incongruent use at this location?
It's been awarded by that particular use, met current standard, and it for that location has received a state permit. So I think you're hearing a lot of discussion that that's a decision that's already been made.
Yeah.
And John, if I can just add something to that too, I think, you know, in my mind, I sort of put that into the category of controlled environment agriculture. And I think it's just one of a number of high value crops that you're going to see increasing appeal growing, you know, close to cities, right? You know, we all know about food security and climate risk and all those sort of things these days. And we want quick, fast produce, and we see these big trends in urban agriculture. I think the peri-urban space around mega cities becomes very attractive to this more controlled agricultural environment. And marijuana is just one of a range. And you've got a number of resources there, including abundant water, surplus water really. And so that area is one that came up in the visioning as one that had a bit of potential. So I know there's a lot of kind of, charge or baggage around, medical marijuana, but if you think of it as it's just a high value crop, well, there's plenty of other high value crops that you might also see interest in as well.
Right, the security around that becomes an issue because every town, Colorado, Oregon, whatever, there has to be a good security base around that type of facility. It's just part of comes with it, and it's a great source of revenue for us. I mean, it's a fact. So, and I think, isn't the facility already pretty well built now? If I'm not mistaken, that facility is that. So that's
no,
not
that's
it?
a different facility.
Okay,
That's
so
different.
there's two, but
Yeah.
it's just that area, right? Where I'm
It's in that area. It's down actually in the area of where Full Features is.
Okay. So this is going to be right as you come into town where they had to identify their address and they had to give all the information for this to be the thing. So right as you come into town on the left-hand side or the west side, this is going to go in. So I'm just referring to what's going to be around it will somewhat be dictated by that large facility.
Jack, did you have a comment on that too for clarification? Given current zoning?
Town is a dispensary. So it's going to look like a drugstore or any other one. Bigger is north further. Where you see the big building, the RV center up there, it's about a quarter mile north of there.
And what you're referring to is the development that's already going in, that's the RV center.
Okay.
So it's the north of there, and Full Features where the dispensary will be is south of there. So it's not right as you come into town. So, but that whole corridor.
Jack was clarifying where the facilities are going to be. There's going to be a dispensary on the, where'd you say, Jack?
134th Street.
About 134th Street. And then the other one is by the RV center, he said.
And those are discussions that we've had with them too. They're aware of that information.
Okay.
Can I also just add, John, to just looking at the chat here, because people in the Performing Arts Centre can't see the chat, but just there is a topic here that Todd's raised regarding, thinking about industrial use further south, right? So, and that's really what we're testing, because we've got this sort of 169 character area, which we've sort of split into two, and we'll talk about the second half of it fairly soon. And I think there's a really, it was very strong in the scenario planning we did in the think tank, this notion of trying to keep sort of heavier trafficking type of things south of 92, right? So, because this also ties into that issue about the community oasis and the feel and, having it be a safe sort of residential community. And so, I think we have to kind of think about what getting this balance right of the beneficial impact on, the city revenue streams and some stability around revenue sources and so on, and some of the perhaps unintended consequences or the other things that come with higher density or higher intensity land use than just agricultural or green space. And I think part of what we want to really start to probe actually when we get into the small town feel discussion tomorrow will be this sort of notion of, what defines you from Kansas City? What happens in that spread that's south of Smithville, and this idea of buffers. And that's why in these concept plans, there's quite a lot of buffering sort of drawn around things. So, I think we'll probably pick that conversation up after we talk about the next character area, but I just wanted to flag that, John, in case you hadn't seen that on the chat.
Thank you for that. And actually, that's a great segue. So maybe with that, I'll move on to the next character area. And again, with the disclaimer of, though, still any comments or thoughts on your mind in just 15 minutes or so, we're going to kind of open it up for another discussion, actually even less than that. And so we'll certainly have a opportunity to hear any feedback about any of the things that we've talked about yet. But so let's talk about that South character area. I personally think that this is a really interesting kind of planning solution. So if that kind of last area just to the north of where the circle is, and kind of to the northwest, is kind of where we are at the current moment prioritizing, and it's looking like the comprehensive plan will kind of allocate towards industrial uses. This south character area, what has stemmed so far from the planning process is this being a location, it's almost predominantly greenfield and undeveloped, but with kind of pockets of housing development subdivisions. And but there's a lot of opportunity and value here. Traffic kind of coming to and out of this, it doesn't cut through the rest of town. You have fantastic proximity and access to the highways, to the airport, to areas south. So this is really valuable, and that's showing in terms of developer interest. And so we talked at great length, and most of this area really revolves around a residential conversation where what's kind of come out of this process is that this is a good location for different types of housing typology and for a higher density that allows for different types of folks from the elderly or newer families or individuals that may not be able to afford or want to live in a detached home. So we think that kind of the future land use map is likely to kind of show these kind of undeveloped areas, still protecting and kind of conserving a large portion of the area, making sure that the development that does occur is really kind of connected to the trail network and the rest of the city, but assuming that there's going to be some mix of commercial use and kind of higher density residential use in this southern area. That said, what we wanted to really talk to you about is the opportunity, and this relates back to the demand drivers. We also think that this is a really high value land area for employment centers, a major business or office park. This is the type of land where when we talk about, either it's bioscience or R&D or bringing tech or bringing kind of, say, a corporate headquarters or something like that to Smithville, this is likely to be the type of location that they might choose first and foremost because of the access and so forth. So our thinking being preliminarily is kind of having an overlay to the land use map, saying if we're kind of assuming in the land use map this is that mix of higher density residential and or commercial uses. However, if there's the right type of opportunity for the right type of employer that brings enough community benefits, then the city should allow that type of user in a kind of well-designed development that can bring those types of positive impacts. And so that's something that we think is a bit creative and a bit kind of interesting there's no indication that that type of user necessarily wants to be here as of right now, but we want to set the framework to realize that potential and maybe to kind of put forth it when we talk about the demand drivers, if the city decides to use certain types of incentives to just create the playing field where that can be that possibility of attracting such a kind of a job creator, a certain type of office or flex user could locate in some of these areas, probably particularly to the west of 169. And so we wanted to kind of test that concept with you all. And again, to kind of paraphrase, that this being kind of predominantly in terms of the future land use map and talking about this being that kind of commercial residential, but with the right type of user that brings the right type of benefits, particularly probably along the lines of employment and tax revenue, that then the city kind of allow that type of development. But we really want to test in with you. Does that make sense? Is there that type of receptivity? And then I want to kind of talk out what are those triggers? Is it really, yes, we'll allow this if you have the right type of use, if you bring in enough revenue, if you bring in enough jobs. I want to kind of tease that out a little bit further. And so with that, I'm going to toss it back to David.
Okay. Let's have a go at this. Okay, so live polling, third section. Okay, so again, you may have to refresh your polling if you have to re-enter the username. FIQ 124. We have 5 questions here for you associated with this character area. John's kind of explained this, and what we're going to probe this in a slightly different way, because we're trying to, in this set of questions, we're trying to figure out what delivers the benefit to the community that makes a development worthwhile, right? So how would you, compare the developments against each other? What sort of, benefits are appealing to you, right? So when identifying the type of industries permitted to locate in the Highway 169 South character area, to what extent should Smithville prioritise the number of jobs created? So very low, low, moderate, high, very high, right? So we're going to have a series of these questions about different types of, benefits. Okay, all right, looks pretty stable. That's pretty, obviously jobs, what's that, 69% of people are saying high or very high, right? Okay. What about the income levels of the jobs created in Smithville? To what extent should that drive prioritisation?
It's really high quality jobs or higher paying jobs.
Yeah. Okay. Not as big a driver. Okay. Interesting. Okay, let's go to the next one. The amount of tax revenue generated for the city. How much did that drive prioritisation? Okay. All right, good. So we're way up there, 89%, thereabouts. Okay, let's look at this one. Sorry, the text was a little bit smaller because we had more words here, right? But for industries in this character area, to what extent should Smithville prioritise the preferred, can't see the text.
I can read it.
Yeah, the preferred type of industry, yeah, with this idea of regional synergy or prestige, such as, sought after industries, tech, bioscience, animal health, right?
So to what extent should the type of industry itself be a driver and be a decision maker, especially as it pertains to, is this the type of synergy or the prestige and the type of industry that the city wants?
Okay. All right, good, thanks. Okay, let's go to the last one. Get onto the screen. So to what extent, so this is a different question, right? So to what extent should Smithville provide incentives to attract businesses that will create a large number of jobs and generate a large amount of tax revenue, which actually were the 2 highest voted benefits?
And to kind of paint this too in terms of what you would typically see, not necessarily in this instance, where there's tax abatement, there's different grants, there's kind of approvals in terms of allowing for different types of development that wouldn't be, but probably you're thinking some kind of financial incentive. And actually to get back to a comment that I saw on the screen earlier from Sean in terms of where other folks have gone wrong with incentives is you still want to make sure that any financial incentives that you give to a company is less than the financial benefit that the tax revenue would come. And where sometimes municipalities go a little wrong is by providing, and actually downtown Kansas City has a couple glaring examples of this, but where you have such huge benefits, financial benefits to attract companies, that there's no way to make back up that the element, again, over the years through tax revenue.
Yeah, good, okay. So, good, so John, that was the last one, so I'll pass that back to you, okay?
So I want to kind of open it up again and give us maybe 10 minutes or so if folks have any other feedback or thoughts on either what types of incentives the city should really lean towards or stay away from, if there's any types of commercial industrial land uses that are really not appropriate in the southern area of Smithville, or any just other thoughts, big or small, pertaining to economic development at large. Don't be shy.
John, if I can chime in too, a lot of the conversations that we had yesterday with the housing task force and this idea of in that southernmost character area and along 169, prioritizing that for mixed use development or higher density residential development. A lot of that conversation comes from the notion of, you know, this is your gateway into Smithville, as we see higher traffic counts going north in Smithville from the highway and from the interstate. And we've been kind of going through this balancing act of what makes the most sense as a gateway, like what would the city like to see in terms of what's the first developments that you experience as you're driving along Highway 169 and that perceptual feel, which is some of the rationale of why maybe we push industry a little bit north of that gateway element and maybe try to tuck that back a little bit behind some commercial uses. But I know in the sidebar comment chat, there was a few comments from several people about, you know, wait, shouldn't industry maybe be in that southern area? So I don't know if anybody has any more comments specific to that, in addition to some of John's discussion questions that he poses on the screen. Just a little insight on some conversations.
No, that's true.
I have a few questions, and I joined late because I couldn't get on Zoom. So stop me if I'm repeating something that you guys have already said. How are we going to use the businesses that we already have in this program? And if we are going to seek this, do we have investors already available looking at doing these things? Or what can we do as a community to get this to our community without, I feel like we have a lot of ideas, but not a lot of investors. So who's going to be investing in these things for us?
Yep. That's a great question. I think that actually strikes at kind of the key element here, which is when if you were to project what would happen over the next 10 years in Smithville, you generally look to past trends and say, is there any events that would make it such that you would not expect the past trends to happen, or that would really kind of rejigger what would happen in the future. And that generally hasn't been the case. So if you were just kind of like be completely laissez-faire, you would expect kind of things to continue on a similar trajectory. And so this conversation is really about exactly that. If Smithville wants to kind of have a stronger hand at kind of controlling its own destiny, what are the possible, kind of given the context, given the will of the city and kind of the existing conditions, what are those potential interventions? So these kind of demand drivers are really those. And what it comes down to is, do we really kind of want to focus on, any element at the expense of the other? Do we want to really kind of focus resources on downtown, on small businesses, on shops? That's great. Do we want to focus our businesses on attracting larger employers? Do we want to focus attention on existing businesses, which may be something like then reduce taxes, provide more technical assistance programs? And there's absolutely no right or wrong. It's really a balance of all the above. But so do you have a thought? Like, what do you think is the kind of answer to your questions?
Well, I was just questioning because it feels like we have a few different directions, but I don't know if we agree on which direction we're trying to go. I don't mind having an idea of focusing on new businesses and bringing new businesses in and infrastructure and doing all those things. But are we going to be doing all of these things, or are we looking for one clear thing to go after? How are we going to market if we are doing what we already have? What are we going to do to come together to do these things?
Yeah, well, I feel like that question is a great summary of what this conversation is what some of the elements. So when we talk about priority of these different things, and again, we're going to be sending out to the community over the course of different social media posts over the week, the results of these polls. But this is some of those beginning of gathering data and information from you all as a task force to start prioritizing that. So I can't remember exactly offhand, but there were certainly certain elements where we just learned that there's significant priority of certain elements over others. And so that kind of helps us narrow down and narrow in terms of priorities. But David, I think you have.
Yeah. So John, I just wanted to contextualize that too, because I think we've got to remember where we are in this process is that what we're trying to do at the moment is understand and forecast what future land use should look like and what character areas should be made up. So exactly who would be in there and what might be in there, we don't know, right? But we want to, in a comprehensive planning process, you've got to design the land use landscape to allow for the future land uses that you want, right? So you want to close the door to things that don't match your vision, and you want to open the door to the broad range of things that might match the vision. And I think the sort of the next phase really is to start to get more granular about, well, what might be some of those businesses. I think we'll have an easier time when we get to the downtown discussion, which will be later this week, obviously. But I think the other thing too that I've seen, this question about who are these investors and where they're coming from. Well, there's people out there looking around all the time for interesting investment opportunities, and I think what the visioning and the comprehensive planning process is starting to provide is that Smithville is starting to telegraph to the broader investment community about the things you're interested in, right? So, for example, I know some of the staff now sit on the biotech corridor that's part of Kansas City. Smithville didn't have a seat at that table previously, it now does, right? And that is supported by the priority rating you gave on, agricultural and biosciences was the second highest, and research and development was the highest, potential land use in that one character area. So I think there's, from a systemic point of view, this process allows you to think about the people who are the voices for your community. What do they need to be amplifying or putting out in the megaphone? The mayor, who should he be talking to, or what kind of businesses should he be sort of twisting the arm of and saying, come and have a look at Smithville and so on, right? So I think it's a little bit of both. You're both sort of defining what your future land use is. So you're sort of defining the lens or the type of business you want. But I think this process also naturally leads to giving the information or the ammunition for your leaders to go out and start to say to people, this is the kind of industry we're interested in. If you're one of those or you're interested in that, come and talk to us because we're ready to sit down.
I think that's a really great point. And I think of it too in terms of thinking big picture of what is kind of the teeth or the landing point of a comprehensive plan. There's certainly some limitations too, where what we're not saying is this exact kind of business should go exactly here, and you can't say that for a number of different reasons. You can't say that. It's not necessarily the role of what the objective is here. Also, you can't just make the market do something. You can't be like, we want X kind of business. That kind of business doesn't want to be here. You can provide a landscape to help guide and incentivize and to create the type of environment that you want. So we're also with the limitations of just the constraints of what the city can do, and also at the constraints of what businesses are interested and willing to do. But then there's also the constraints of what is the output of a comprehensive plan. And that's what this is, again, is that visioning document that really guides future policy and planning. But there's a lot of elements that are kind of noted. Okay, here's the concept that decision-making needs to get to, but it's not filling in all the dots. There's so many different types of plans or discussions that need to happen within this after this is completed, but they know, okay, the general output or prerogative of kind of future decision making should align with the will of the comprehensive plan. But there's still, you know, a lot of specifics that will have to happen, you know, at the city level through more community engagement in the future.
If I could real quick, I think it's important to to also emphasize like the historic downtown section of Smithville, it's not going anywhere. And we're not going to be putting in an oil production company right on the square, because that's ludicrous and absolutely ridiculous. However, like in today's world, those historic downtowns with the older buildings and that hometown feel, like that tends not to be the priority when it comes to jobs and taxes coming into the city. So in order to have that foundation to bolster up those niche boutique areas like our historic downtown, we have to lay a foundation first of things that do coincide with the modern commercial and the modern industrial. Doesn't mean that we have to have plants billowing out smoke from miles on end. But it does say, like, in order to have what we want to make our community what it is and to bolster that image, we still have to lay the groundwork on an economic foreground first, by seeing like what is it the city needs in order to boost ourselves to that next level, to have the downtown and have that complete vision that we want as a community.
Well said. And you're officially on the team, Sean. well said. So to wrap up, first of all, I thought this was really helpful on our end, and this was a good conversation, and some of those rapid polls too were very insightful. And I'm not going to lie, a little not surprising necessarily based on this conversation, but it's always really interested. You know, we're outsiders, you know, just coming in and learning about your town and talking to you all to see certain dynamics that continue to kind of run through the process, where there's just certain responses that are truly different in a lot of other places. And so it's really neat, you know, great to see kind of unique receptivity and interests of Smithville specifically. What we do, kind of our last discussion question, and this can be a brief one, or maybe it can be a lengthy one was there anything that didn't come up today related to economic development that really should, that's a significant omission? Also, was there any voices that are really not being brought into this conversation, or any perspectives that are really important that we should know what those perspectives are related to economic development that aren't here, you know, and whether that's, you know, an industry organization, whether it's a certain kind of key stakeholder, whether that's a certain demographic slice within the city. Are there certain perspectives that are missing so far, both in terms of either people or in terms of ideas? And is there anything that, you know, that is kind of a missing hole right now that we need to make sure to fill in? So with that, I'd love to hear any kind of thoughts or reactions.
One thing to also address, I know as we were kind of looking through the comments and the really great conversations that's been happening to the side of the presentation today, I believe it was Todd brought up a great point of, you know, we don't want to become Liberty, or we saw this also in our community survey and some of the questions that we were asking early on in the process of, we don't want to become X or Y or these other locations, and how important it is for Smithville to stay true to Smithville as it grows and changes. And Todd, I don't know if you're on the call still and wanted to chime in anything more specifically about what are those elements that we don't want to see, or what are the controls that we want to protect ourselves against. Feel free to bring in some insight with this idea of, you know, what was surprising, or what do we want to make sure that we're addressing in the comp plan.
And can I also add to that, Leslie, as well, that I think this sort of discussion about, and the thing we're going to invite you to think about is, between now and the next task force meeting and participating in some of these discussions, to really start to really finesse what is that economic development that you think best fits. That, you know, as Sean said, you know, there could be some things that could happen in Smithville that could provide revenue streams and you know, economic activity that really make a lot of what else you want possible, right? You know, that fund that. And so you know, I think there's, you know, this is obviously the start of a conversation, not the end of the conversation is the point. And we're really going to encourage you to continue to explore this, and we'll be posting some discussion topics that we can ask you to wade into and so on as we go forward. So I just want to add that as well, is that, you know, really you know, we know there's a lot we've kind of laid on you, right? And you're going to have a chance to digest it. The other thing I would suggest is that on the portal, we've loaded the character maps there now, and you can go in and look at those visualizations that John was showing, and actually you can kind of figure out that we're not talking massive parcels of land. I mean, we're talking, there's a fairly finite amount of developable land, and try to think about how do you get the best use for that provides the best benefit for the community, because we're not talking like, you know, miles and miles, right? We're talking parcels, right? And you know, a few unique sort of development opportunities. You know, the scale's not massive, and, you know, just to give you a bit of context on that, but you can see that in those concept plans that we've posted on the portal.
I think that there have been some accidents up by Quick Trip and the fire station, which you guys wouldn't really know because you haven't been in here, but where the industrial place is close to is up north that way. And I think people are worried about traffic and the fact that accidents. So if we were to develop that, we would have to look at working on our roads and infrastructure some more on roads for that. And I think that's where the concern of traffic is. Because some of our subdivisions are having to add in roundabouts that should have been added in a few years ago. So I think that there has been some significant traffic incidences or concerns, which is why these things keep coming up.
And that's to the north?
Yes.
That's in the Hospital Bluff character, I think.
And we have I think they have expanded the roads and added more things, but I think that there's some fear because of past history, and there is development going on. It's just not everybody's aware of what has been done to help aid in that. So. Yeah,
and actually that's good, Kelly, because, you know, just to sort of put it up there, tomorrow night we'll be talking about the recreation connectivity side of this comprehensive planning process, and that whole strategic pillar. And I know you're talking about sort of accidents on the road, but safety is a big issue for people in Smithville. And we want to be talking tomorrow night a lot about how do we have these multimodal systems where, you know, there's trails and bikeways and other ways that people can get around safely, right? So, but getting that whole balance right of, you know, the intensity of development, traffic, all those things, that's part of the Rubik's Cube that we're trying to wriggle together. So John, do you want to finish this up?
Let's roll out. Yeah. So as David mentioned, over the kind of opened with over the next few weeks, we're going to be posing kind of a number of additional kind of follow-up questions to the planning portal to kind of tease out some additional elements. We're going to be drafting a draft future land use map to have presented to the Planning Commission in early-ish August. The draft comprehensive plan document that will be submitted for feedback and discussion in September, if I'm correct on that timing. So that's kind of big picture, kind of what the main next steps are. And again, stay involved. There's a number of things that we'll be sending out to respond to. If you're interested, absolutely check out the portal for those kind of future land use maps. Feel free to parse through that. When is the next round of task force meetings too?
Yeah, so they're at the very end of August, the first part of September, that week. I think it's the 31st of August, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of September. You know, there's the link there. We'll be posting onto the Smithville Facebook page. We'd really encourage you guys to participate, but also get other people to jump in on some of these discussion topics as well. I think one of the really unique defining features of this process is the level of community engagement through the visioning and through into the strategic planning process. And I think that that sets you up for a plan that is really yours and expresses what you want, rather than you just got a bunch of planners who, you know, go, this is what you should do. You know, that what this process is just translating the desires of the community into a guiding planning framework, and that's your pathway to be able to create the Smithville you want in the future. So just to close out, we just wanted to thank you for your participation. You know, really fantastic to have people in real life there in the Performing Arts Centre. Hello, everybody. And also great to have people jumping in on Zoom and participating the way you did. I think we collected some really great information. We've moved the ball forward a little bit. Obviously, there's some more things to think about. You surface some of those. We want to keep noodling away with you over the next month, and then start to tighten that up as we, you know, move into locking down the land use plan and character areas and so on. So with that, we'd like to just wish you the best. Thank you very much, and hopefully we'll see a number of you on the task force discussions both tomorrow and the night after, and hopefully we'll see you participating right through. So really appreciate your input and your commitment to your community. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
I think it would be better to be on the old Italian yesterday.
Yeah, that's why I'm on my head. I'm watching.
Yeah, it is on Zoom at home.